From the time that they pronounced me dead was a good 45 minutes.
They cut my clothes and then they paddled my heart because my heart had stopped. And I could see people screaming and crying, but I didn't realise that was actually my physical body because I was somewhere else.
The only thing that I could feel, if you could imagine, absolute love and peace. There wasn't anything else to be felt.
I was greeted by people I'd known in the past.
I'm back home again.
Incredibly safe and felt at home.
Welcome to Round Trip Death, everybody. And I'd like to welcome our special guest today, Dr. Barbara Mack from the good state of Washington. How are you today?
Very good. Thank you.
Good. Well, welcome to the show. I know you haven't shared your experience publicly before, and I appreciate you trusting us to be able to do that here. This is a non-judgmental place, so you can open up your heart, tell us what happened to you and what you learned from it and all those kinds of things. But before we do, I want our listeners to get to know you a little bit. So tell us, who's Barbara?
Okay, so I am a mother of 4 kids, a grandmother of 2, a wife and a physician. Used to be in the ER mostly, and then about 15 years ago or so, I kind of transitioned over to more of a private practice, where I really try to help people find the underlying causes of their distress. I do like bioidentical hormones, natural things, totally outside of the insurance and pharmaceutical. Well, not pharmaceutical. I do prescribe drugs, but it's just I don't take insurance, and it's just my own small practice. So.
Okay, so are you a DO?
No, I'm an MD.
Okay.
Medical doctor.
And I'm not sure that I understand all the differences between those things.
DO and an MD are pretty much the same.
Yeah.
There are just a lot more MD schools than there are DO schools, but the philosophy is a little bit different on the DO side. They're more holistic, perhaps, but really pretty much the same. Whereas a naturopath is all the way a lot more holistic. So I'm not a naturopath, but I kind of tend that way now.
It's very refreshing to hear from a doctor that is rooted in the causes of what's going on versus just write you a prescription to take care of the symptoms. So thank you for that.
Trying to do, yes.
That is awesome. Okay. Near-death experience time. You ready to talk about this?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. This was what, 10 years ago?
2006. So a bit more, but
a little more than that. You had a run in. Okay, I'm sorry. This is not funny. I'm wiping the laugh off my face because this is not funny. It just sounds very unusual, and that is that you had a run-in with fire ants.
Yes.
What was going on that day? How did you find yourself there?
So my husband was stationed in North Carolina at Fort Bragg. He was going to play golf with his teammates. He's in Special Forces, and they were going to play golf. And so I went basically to be their designated driver because they were drinking. So at the end of the day of golfing and everything, it was a beautiful day. And at the end of the day, we were all kind of roughhousing a little bit and playing, just kidding. And I ended up falling on my back. And there are a lot of fire ant hills in North Carolina, and those things they're really painful. And I stay clear of those things. You can usually see them because they're huge mounds of fire ant hill stuff. They're big, and they're easy to recognize. But on a golf course that's been manicured, you don't see that. It was flat. So I didn't know. And I just ended up on my back on top of one of these hills. And I suddenly felt all this stinging all around me and especially on my neck. And I got up and I had fire ants swarmed, like hundreds or maybe thousands of them. There were just so many. And they sting. They really hurt when they sting. And I just kind of rubbed them all off, wiped them off, brushed them off and got up and I'm really itchy and it hurts, but I'm otherwise fine. So at that point, we were going to drive home. And so I started driving my husband home. And to get through the base, we were playing on they were playing on the golf course that is on the base in Fort Bragg. And to get back to where we lived in Southern Pines, I had to drive through an area that's very remote. It's a training area where people jump in their parachutes off. So there's really nothing out there. There's no convenience stores or place where you could make a phone call, and no signal for the cell phones either. And about 18 miles of that. And about halfway through that, I told my husband, I don't feel really well. I think you better drive it. He's already had a DUI. He did not want to drive. But he started to say no, but then he looked at me and he said, oh, okay. Because I guess my face was really swollen from all the fire ant stings. I was having a little trouble breathing, but mostly I was just didn't feel well. Probably my blood pressure was dropping from the toxin. So he took over the driving, and I told him, you need to take me. I need something. I knew I was not going to make it all the way home. I knew that the venom was dropping my blood pressure, and I would need something. Like epinephrine would have been the medication of choice, but I knew that there was no way of getting that in time, but that we could drive off the base to a convenience store, a gas station, and I could buy some Benadryl. So I asked him to do that, and he started driving that way. And then we finally get to the gas station. My husband pulls up, and he goes in, and I actually don't even remember that part. I vaguely remember pulling up, and I don't remember much after that. He's in there, but the next thing I know, I'm in this place. It's kind of like maybe a large room, and I'm sort of at the bottom of this big gray space. Everything was kind of like misty, but it was not a cold mist. It was like a warm mist, and I was comfortable. But I'm sitting there, and everything was just gray, and it was nothing. And I didn't have my body. I was sort of a amorphous something. And then I noticed above me, there were 2 and then 3 kind of beings. And they were like me. They were sort of this amorphous substance. They were lighter than the gray background, but they were sort of just these kind of blobs. I don't know. They didn't have arms or a face or hands or anything or feet, but they were beings. I knew that they were beings. And I also knew that especially one of them, it chokes me up to talk about it even now, even so long after. One of them, especially, was very close to me and knew me very, very well, knew me intimately, and had my best interests at heart. I didn't feel like what some people describe as love and stuff like that. I just felt comfortable and safe. I understood these 2 or 3 beings somewhere above me, to have my best interests at heart. And then there appeared kind of an opening, a circular opening in the top of this area. It wasn't really an enclosure either, but it was sort of an area, and I kind of had my back to something. It wasn't a wall, but it was like it didn't continue past my back. I looked up, and there was this large circle in this enclosure, and white light was coming from it. Some kind of light was coming from it. And the 3 beings were kind of hovering near that opening, but inside the place I was. And they were discussing my fate without words, without speaking. I came to understand that I was going to die. And I said, wordlessly, I'm going to die, and that's okay. And then there was a bit of a pause. And then what came back from the being that was closest to me was, no, it's not okay. You have to. I don't know why I get choked up about this still, but the being said, you have to go back. And I was like, I didn't understand why I would be okay with dying, because I was not suicidal. I was enjoying life. I was, I had my 4 kids were great, but they were old enough to be okay on their own, I guess. They were in their teens and 20s. So I guess I could have left, but I was fine with going. But anyway, when they told me I had to go, I wasn't going to die, and I had to go in there. They said, you have to go in there and tell them what to do, which I knew meant I had to go get out of the car and go into the convenience store and tell them I needed Benadryl. And I knew that I would have to bite and chew it, because it wouldn't be the injectable kind, but biting and chewing it would get enough of the chemical, and it could be absorbed through the mucous membranes in your mouth, that I could get enough to probably help me with the toxin, the venom. So that's what I did. I got up out of the car, and I walked in, and I opened the door to the store, and I thought that I told them what I had to tell them, but apparently what they say I did is I just crashed forward and took down a candy rack of candy with me. And so then I'm on the ground, and so I guess I passed out. But then once on the ground, I guess now my pressures get, at least get blood's flowing to my brain when I'm on the ground, even if my pressure's low. So I was able to speak again, and I told them I need Benadryl, and then the storekeeper quickly got me a packet of Benadryl. There were 3 tablets in there, and I just opened it up and I chewed them all still on the ground, and then I got better. I was able to get up, walk out of there, a little embarrassed that I'd created such a mess, including I lost my control of my bladder. So I left a puddle of urine on the floor and left the poor shopkeeper to mop that up. Um, but I got in the car and my husband drove me home, and that was pretty much the end of it. But I kept thinking about this. What was this? What had happened? Yeah, for years I thought about it. I told people about it, and I really couldn't figure it out. And then only recently I started watching some of the YouTube videos of the near-death experiences, and I thought that's what it is. I tried many other things. I even tried, I tried meditating, which was helpful, but it never got me near. I even tried LSD or psilocybin with I hired somebody. I paid this woman $700 to babysit me to do this, even trying to do it correctly. But I didn't get anywhere like this with that experience. It was interesting, but it was not the same.
I've had people tell me that they've tried mushrooms, they've tried ketamine, other things like that to reproduce what happened to them, and it never works. Yeah, especially those that feel the intense love on the other side. I'm so sorry you missed that part, that you didn't really get that experience, but so many people do. That's part of what just can't be recreated when people hope to be able to recreate it some other way, which is also why when people say, well, gee, I want one of those cool NDEs for myself too. No, you can't. You may not come back, for one thing. And trying to do it with drugs just usually doesn't work. So, well, not usually. I've never heard of it working. It doesn't work. So don't try.
I definitely would not recommend anybody attempting this, but I still find it reassuring, after listening to other people's stories. And I think we need to get these stories out. We need to tell people about these things, because I'm sure there's many, many others that have not been told. And I think now it's kind of safe for people to talk about them. I think, maybe even 10 or 15 years ago, talking about this might get you labeled as crazy, or, even churches would not go along with this, because some of this might contradict the teachings of some, religious organizations, who might be well-meaning, but maybe they don't want to hear this stuff.
You're right about all of that. And luckily it's changing.
I think
But
it
yeah,
is.
I've met with so many people that had experiences back, and especially in maybe the 70s and 80s, okay, long before you did. And they told a doctor or a nurse or some other professional, and they were like, just don't talk about that. We're going to have to take you up to the psych ward. And so they bottled it up all these years, but it is safe to talk about now in most
Yes. Yeah.
cases. And so I'm glad that you're able to do that. And you don't have to fear, gee, I'm a doctor. Is this going to ruin my credibility to talk about this? I'm glad we're at a place where you can just open up about it now, because 20 years ago you couldn't.
Yes, I can see that. And so probably these things have been occurring a lot more than we know. And I think people need to understand, because the message is wonderful. And, I didn't get the full experience that many other people got. And I don't regret that, because, that might have just brought me closer to death, and I'm glad to be alive. But I no longer fear death.
And that's always one of my questions is, what level of fear of death do you have?
I used to be afraid of death. It used to scare me a lot. I was brought up Catholic, but I'd become more or less agnostic at that point. And I was mostly concerned that there wouldn't be an afterlife, and this was it. And so it's really encouraging to me to hear that is there not only is there an afterlife, there absolutely is an afterlife. Not only that, but it's encouraging that it's a good thing. It's beautiful. It was comfortable for me. It wasn't beautiful. It wasn't fantastic. I didn't feel all the love that I hear people talk about, but I did feel that I did understand that the beings that were with me, It might have been my guides or something. I don't know. But those beings did love me, and they knew me. And, from my medical mind, I tried to rationalize it as maybe this part of my brain was talking to that part of my brain. And I really tried to come up with a story that would fit a medical model for it. I really did. But I didn't. And it wasn't until I came across a near death experience, and I thought, wait a second. I listened to several of them, and then I realized that's the same thing. And then the more I listened to, the more consistencies I heard from people's stories. I mean, not everybody's story is consistent, but there are a number of things that are consistent in everyone's story, or in many stories, and that were enough that aligned with what I had been through. It was really, really positive and encouraging, and makes me feel happy because I know that experience was real. It was very real. It's not something I imagined, because even today it is so much. I don't have to think back and try to remember it. It's as though it happened yesterday. I still get choked up when I think about parts of it, even as brief as mine was.
Well, I appreciate that. It's interesting that, well, a couple of things. One is everybody's experience is different, although there are commonalities.
Yeah.
And some people feel like, hey, I really saw heaven. And these are sometimes people that were clinically dead for a few minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And other people just have sort of a toe dipped in, right? That's sort of like what yours was,
Yeah.
where
Yes.
they're just, maybe there wasn't time, maybe there wasn't the depth of the experience for you to be quite that immersed as some other people are. But it's amazing that even dipping your toe in can be so profound for you, isn't
It
it?
was still very profound. It's still, something I thought about constantly, not constantly, but it never left my mind. I was thinking about it, trying to learn about it, and trying to figure out what was that. It's recently that I'm finding these stories, they align with what I went through.
Well, I hope that's been helpful for you to, comprehend what you went through. Maybe, cycle it through your brain and understand it a little bit better. Tell me, in your medical training, was there any talk of near-death experiences or out of body or anything like that at all?
No, I mean, I had heard of out of body experiences, but I, never did we have any kind of training on that. Maybe they are now. I graduated in 1986 from medical school, so, but maybe now there are.
Well, some are, but I don't know if it's regular med school training or something beyond that. I know that IONS, they have, I was at their annual conference not too long ago, and they had specific presentations for medical people, and they were able to get a sign off as X amount of hours of training. Yeah, there were doctors and nurses and other people there getting some of that training and being able to count it as, I don't know how many hours do you need every year of training?
But there's no difficulty in reaching them. But I would love to do that training just for the
Yeah.
experience, not so much for the credit.
Okay, we'll
So,
see you there next year. You can get both.
okay, yeah, I'll take the credit, but I'm there for the. I'm really interested in. I'd love to hear it. I'd love to. So there will be another one coming up.
Well, every year it's usually just before Labor Day. So last year, this most recent one was down in Phoenix, before that Washington and Salt Lake City, and next year's in Chicago. Now, I don't work for IONS. I don't get paid by IONS or anything else. It's just a really good nonprofit organization where you can spend time meeting with other people that have had experiences like yours, and that can be very helpful, very therapeutic. Also, there are IONS chapters all over the country and in a lot of other countries too. So if you feel like it would be helpful for you,
IAIANDS.
yeah, it's IANDS,
Okay.
ds.org, and it stands for International Association of Near-Death Studies.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I'd love to. I'd love to read some studies or find out more about it. So, yeah.
Yeah, it can be helpful because when people come back from these experiences, we don't know how to process them, and that's normal, and that's okay. Just a brief interruption. This month, we're asking you, our favorite listener, to support the show. It's definitely a labor of love for Will and me, but it takes a ton of time and money, and we need donations to keep things going. It's easy. Go on over to roundtripdeath.com, click on the little donation button in the upper right-hand corner. You can show your support for the podcast and help us move forward. We appreciate it. Merry Christmas and thank you. Now, back to the guest. Let me ask you a couple of questions about some of the things that you went through. And you gave a good description, by the way. The three beings, you weren't able to explain what they looked like. Could you get into that anymore? I think you called them like blobs. Were they light, dark, colorful?
They had no shape really. They had no features, no faces, no arms, legs, no, and neither did I. I was one of them also. I kind of experienced them as having more light than the background light, than the background fog or mist. And I use that word, but when anybody that's, I'm in Washington State where we have fog and mist and drizzle all the time. It's not like that. It was just sort of it was just, everything was gray, but it was warm and comfortable gray. And they were lighter, but they were just sort of an oval kind of blob that even kind of changed. It wasn't, its outline wasn't the same all the time. They got smaller or bigger. They had really no shape, amorphous really. So I guess that they were just made of energy. And I wanted to be closer to them, especially there was one that why do I get so choked up every time I think of that one? I guess maybe now I'm using the pronoun he, so maybe it's a male thing, but I don't know. But it seemed closer to me, and it seemed to know me very well. And it cared for me or had love for me, although I didn't experience the overwhelming love that I've heard described. I just knew that I could trust this being, and whatever it said, I would do.
I think that is so amazing that you had an experience with beings that you can't describe how they looked. They didn't talk out loud, and yet communication happened.
Yes.
How do you explain that?
I don't. I think about that a lot. And this morning when I was running and I had my headphones on, I was listening to a version of Simon and Garfunkel's Sounds of
Silence.
Yeah, and I guess I've heard that song a zillion times before. I've run to it. I've listened. Everyone's heard that song since the '70s, I guess, when it first came out. And I was listening to a different rendition of it, and then the words, "Hello, darkness, my old friend." That even the very beginning, it's like I was in this dark gray place, but it was like the old friend. It was.
Go ahead and read the first verse.
Okay, hello, darkness, my old friend. I didn't write down all the lyrics.
I've come to talk with you again. Because a vision softly creeping left its seeds while I was sleeping, and the vision that was planted in my brain still remains within the sound of silence.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, that reminds me of this experience, and it still remains the vision, whatever that vision was, even though it was really not much I could see. I was just more of aware than using my eyes. And then they talk further about people talking without speaking, people hearing without listening, people writing songs that voices never share. There was talking and listening, but no speaking, and I wasn't using my ears. It was just I understood. Like I understood from their talk, that from what they were telling me or what they were saying, that I was going to die, and then they told me differently, without words.
We need to get Paul Simon on this show and see if he had an NDE, and maybe that was his inspiration.
Yeah, and I wonder how much else out there is also related to this, and maybe artists who made these songs had these experiences, couldn't talk about them in another way, but they could write songs about them.
I think there's a lot, and I think people have been afraid to talk about it. If you think about, for example, Charles Dickens, What was his inspiration for the Christmas story?
Yes, yes. Yeah, the Christmas story. Yeah, the Christmas past, future, and the whole message is the same. Be good to people. Just all you have to do is just love people genuinely. And it's that's really the message is so simple, and it's that's all it is, and it's beautiful. And I found since then that's what I try to do. Now I've left the emergency room, and I've created my own practice where I can spend an hour with each patient. I don't take insurance, but I can spend an hour with each patient and really hear their story, because you really have to listen, and you will learn much more that way. It's just you have to listen and allow people to tell you their stories.
One other thing about these beings, you felt like they were communicating. They were talking about you, about the fact that you needed to go back. Can you
Yes.
explain that any more detail?
First they said, or I came to understand that I was going to die, and I said wordlessly, I'm going to die, and that's okay. Then there appeared to be some more conversation among them, or they were, and I didn't hear everything that they were saying. I really wanted to be closer to them. They were out of my reach. Not that I had arms that I couldn't reach it, but they were too far from me, and I wanted to get closer to them, but they weren't allowing that. And when they told me I had to go back, then that was the end of my time with them. But it seemed like they were discussing. Well, no, it looks like not. It's not gonna. No, she can't go back. She has to go back. And it wasn't. They didn't use pronouns either. I mean, they were all talking about me without using the pronoun. Like, they weren't talking about me in the third person. It was like I was in the first person talking. They were me. They were part of me. They knew me that well, and they were part of everything. But they were a part of me.
Hard to understand, isn't it?
I only understood those things and I accepted them, and I was fine with all that. So when they told me, no, you have to go back, it's like, okay, that's what I do. And so I got up to do what they told me to do. And it's like the part that controlled my body came back to my body and controlled my body to walk it into the convenience store. And then my pressure, I guess, dropped again, and I couldn't. It wasn't until I landed on the floor that my pressure came back up enough for me to mentate enough. And maybe I did die, and if I had been left in that car, any longer, I probably would have died. It was such a massive dose of venom. I don't have an allergy to Hymenoptera, which is the kind of they're like bees. They're related to bees. They sting, fire ants. I don't have an allergy to that venom as far as I know, and I've been stung since. But one or two, no big deal. But it was just the massive amount of venom that I got from that many stings that caused my blood pressure to drop, and probably I would have died if I hadn't done something.
Yeah, that's a scary thing, a really scary thing. When we spoke previously, you mentioned something about your father visiting you after he died. Would you mind telling that story too?
Sure. Yeah. So right around beginning of the pandemic, my dad got sick. It wasn't COVID, but he's in his late 80s, 89, and he was on the East Coast, and there were lockdowns and stuff like that, and it was really hard to get him good care, and I was flying back and forth. It happened to him in Florida. He lives in New York. I had to fly back and forth to Florida quite frequently to try and help him. And he ended up on dialysis. He had heart disease. He had to have heart surgery twice, and a number of things. And coordinating his care was just terrible. And it was really, really a traumatic, difficult thing for me, because I've been very close to my dad. So, but he passed away, and finally, and after 2 years of that, he passed away. And then, so it was 2022. My brothers and my mother and I and my sister, the family went to the Bahamas, which was he loved to sail, he loved the water, and his favorite place in the Bahamas. We went there, Elbow Key, and we went there to spread his ashes. And so I flew there with my husband, and before we, and that night after I flew there, we got in our hotel, the cottage that we were renting, and my husband went out to look at the ocean, and I was alone in our little cottage, and I lay down and on the bed, and then next thing I knew, my father was standing right next to me, standing next to the bed. And I saw him, he looked to me as he did back when he was young and healthy, like in his 30s, late 30s, early 40s, is how I remember him. He was healthy back when he was healthy and surfing and stuff like that. That's how he came to me. And he didn't say anything to me, but I understood he wanted to see my mother. And so, and then I remembered that I realized that the place that we were renting was the place that he and my mother had stayed in last time we had been in the Bahamas at Elbow Key. And so I knew where my mother was staying in a different cottage a little ways down. So I got up and I started walking that way so that for him to follow me. And I don't know if he followed me. I just kind of understood that that's what I believed that that's what he wanted. And so I walked over to down to where my mother was staying, and it was after midnight. So I didn't wake her up or anything. I just took my dad there, or at least that's what I believe I did. And then one other time he came to me. It sounds kind of silly, but he told me to buy chickens. We live in the city, and we have a little quarter acre in the city. So, but we did. I told my husband, and we went and bought baby chicks and started raising chickens. It turned out to be just a wonderful, fun blessing. And so now we have, 5 chickens in a little plot in the city here, in the suburbs. And they're really so much fun. And my dad had written a story about, he had chickens during the Depression. And it was really great having them when during during recent years when groceries got real expensive and everything, and we had eggs and stuff like that. But their personalities and everything was just so wonderful. And he came to me a third time when my husband and I were laughing over the antics of the chickens. It was just a light, kind of fun, I think, message he was giving me. I don't know what to make of it, but now we want to get a farm and live off grid and stuff. So
Come out and live by us. That's what we're doing.
is it
Up here in the mountains. We'll talk about this later. Okay, just a couple more things, then I'm going to let you go. One of them is, in what ways did this change your life? And you've mentioned it a little bit, but tell me a little bit more.
Sure, yeah. So I had been really pretty fearful before of, fearful of dying, but fearful of lots of things. And I'm not anymore. I'm definitely not afraid of dying. I don't want to die, and I don't want to experience pain before death. But now I'm okay. I'm happy about it because I know it's not going to be a bad thing. I think I didn't have a life review, but I realized that all these things, everything I've done in my life, I will need to answer to at some point. And I must always think about the other people that I affect with my actions. And it gives me a feeling of peace, just knowing just knowing that that's all I need to do is just, listen, try to understand the people around me and do what I can to help them. No matter how it brings me into contact, whether it's a patient, a family member, a stranger on the street, every interaction is an opportunity to do the right thing. And I no longer feel as bad about all the bad things I've done, all the mistakes I've made in my life, which have been plenty. So I no longer feel so bad about that because I know that I can ask forgiveness and it will be okay. And I just have to do better in the future, the best I can do.
Can you say something to those people out there that are really wondering if there is an afterlife or maybe don't believe it?
Yeah, I mean, I was, although raised Catholic, I had become agnostic. I now consider myself a Christian. I do go to church sometimes. I am confident. I know I don't have any hard evidence. Well, actually, there is some hard evidence. Not in my story, but from listening to other people's story, it gives me enough that I am absolutely convinced that there is an afterlife and that it's a good one. We don't need to fear it, even if we've done wrong. We can ask for forgiveness and we can just try to do better in the future. And I want people to be reassured, as I am, because I wasn't reassured until learning about these things. I was anxious about dying and about what's going to happen in the future. And I no longer am. And none of this on earth really matters. That's not quite so much. What really matters is just how we treat people, which is the teachings of Christ. That's really, in my mind, all that he was teaching. And so I'm not so sure about religion all the time, but Christ's teachings were just to do the right thing for other people, to love them.
All right. Barbara, I really appreciate it. I know you've touched somebody today, so thank you for your time.
Well, thank you. Thank you for doing this.
Thanks again for listening and sharing this podcast. Don't forget to hit the follow or subscribe button and sign up for our newsletter at roundtripdeath.com. If you want to share your near-death experience, or if you have questions or comments about the show, send an email to eric@roundtripdeath.com. Until then, I wish you everything good that you're looking for in this life and the next.